Make sure you have your Blue Gateways book and turn to page 19, because this is a video for Chapter 2, Americans Declare Their Independence. In this chapter, we will cover standards 1.3 and 1.4. 1.3 says you'll be able to describe how English policies and responses to colonial concerns led to the writing of the Declaration of Independence, and 1.4, you'll be able to analyze the ideas, the natural rights and role of government, and complaints set forth in the Declaration of Independence. On the bottom of page 19, you see a list of key terms you should know. When you're done reviewing these terms, turn the page. Make sure you have a pen, pencil, and highlighter ready so you can mark the text as we go through this reading. Page 21. In the last chapter, you learned how England established 13 colonies in North America. These colonists enjoyed the same rights as the people in Great Britain. They had all the rights given by the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights. The colonists also enjoyed some unique powers of self-government. Each colony had its own legislator, which resolved many local problems. The colonies were simply too far from England for many important decisions to be made there. The French and Indian War. In 1754, Britain went to war with France. This conflict became known in America as the French and Indian War. So it says the French and Indian War, but it was really a war between France and Great Britain. France eventually lost the war and was forced to surrender its colonies in North America. Underline or highlight that sentence. Canada and the Ohio River Valley came under British rule. The American colonists were pleased with this outcome. They no longer had to worry about defending themselves against the French and their Indian allies. On the other hand, the British government found itself deeply in debt. It had borrowed large sums of money to pay for the war. So the British beat the French, which made the Americans happy, because at that time there were French settlers over in the colonies, and the Americans were the British settlers, and they had to keep fighting over here. So the French and their Indian allies kept fighting against the British and their allies, which means the Americans were helping the British. So when the war was over, and England and France finally were able to put the war to the side, the British had gotten a lot of debt, all that money it cost to go to war, so they had all this debt to pay off.
Hey kids, welcome to Unit 2, the Revolutionary War. During this unit, we're going to be talking about the causes of the Revolutionary War, the major battles, and its outcome. We got some great questions for this unit, so listen up. Here they are. What was the French and Indian War all about, and why was it so important? Aha, oui, oui. Those French guys. What were the major causes of the Revolutionary War? Yep. Who were loyalists and who were patriots? Ooh, I think I know this one. Aren't they a football team? How did a place called Valley Forge turn the tide of the war? Or did it? Well, there you have it, our questions for our unit on the Revolutionary War. We're going to get started today with that French-Indian War. So, grab your flag, get your drum. I got the fife. The French-Indian War. You may have heard of this war before, maybe not though. The French-Indian War was the first major war fought in North America. The war involved four groups. On one side was the French, an age-old enemy of Britain, and Native Americans, who mostly sided with the French. On the other side were the American colonists and Great Britain, with a few Native American allies. So let's talk about why this war happened in the first place. In our simulation, you colonists were blamed for starting the war with France because you angered the natives. In reality, it was the rivalry between France and Britain, fighting for control of the resources available in the New World, specifically the Ohio River Valley. You were just being blamed to justify taxes. So you may be wondering, why did the natives ally with the French instead of with the British? In reality, both groups were fighting for a land that was occupied by Native Americans. Well, there was a difference between how Native Americans were treated by the British and the French. The French had fewer settlements in America and were more likely to live among the natives, learn their culture, even at times marry a member of their tribe. The British, on the other hand, were more likely to have conflicts with the natives and force them off their land. Over time, the French-Indian War turned into a world war. Fighting spread to India, Sweden, and Austria. At the end of the war, Even Spain got into it. By the time the war ended, many people would die and much gold would be spent. In fact, Britain would spend so much gold it would have a great deal of debt by the time the war was over. This is where we get to the main point of why we're talking about this war in the first place. You see, the debt that Britain accumulated had to be paid for. And for the first time, Britons started looking to the wealth of their American colonies for the money. They were, in fact, the beneficiaries of the war, in that French competition was gone, and now there was more territory to expand to. It only seemed fitting that they should help repay the debt. Until now, the colonists were making the king money through a system called imperialism. We refer to this as the Circle in our Fact Action Debate class activity. Remember, the Circle is all about keeping trade in the family, so to speak. Great Britain used laws like the Navigation Acts to control trade from the colonies and make sure it benefited Great Britain more than the colonists. Colonists who didn't like giving up personal profits to benefit the king and country would have to break these rules and become smugglers. After the French Indian War, however, Great Britain needed more than just control of trade. They needed income in the form of taxes paid by the colonists. Debate over whether the king had the right to tax the colonists would eventually lead to the colonies declaring their independence. So really, the French Indian War is kind of the cause of the Revolutionary War. Without the war, Great Britain might have gone on to control the colonies to this very day. But that is not what happened. So what else happened because of the French Indian War? Well, Britain did win the war, and with that victory gained control of Canada and Florida. To get Spain out of the war, they were given the port city of New Orleans. So, in the end, France is kicked out of North America, England expands the territory it controls in America. So what? Well, if you can answer the following questions, then you learned what you needed to know. Who fought in the French Indian War? And what were they fighting over? Why were the Native Americans more likely to side with the French than the British? And finally, what was the outcome of the war and how is it related to the Revolutionary War? Stay tuned next time when we talk about the causes of the Revolutionary War.
Taxation without representation. People living in Britain were already paying more in taxes than the colonists in North America. The British government therefore decided that the colonists should pay more towards their own defense. Parliament passed a series of laws to tax the colonists. Since the colonies were so far from London, no attempt was made to obtain their consent. So, the people in England were already paying more in taxes than the Americans were, but yet this war was happening over in America, fighting the French and the Indians off. So the people in Great Britain, the British, thought, well, maybe the Americans should start paying their fair share. But since they were so far away, and there were no cell phones, so you couldn't just call them, they just went ahead and passed these new taxes without asking for their consent or the permission of those in America. The first of these laws was the Stamp Act, passed in 1765. This act required every official document, newspaper, or pamphlet in the colonies to have an expensive government stamp. Underline or highlight that entire little paragraph. So what that's saying is any newspaper, any pamphlet, which is like a small book, or any official document had to have a stamp. And that stamp was a way of taxing the people. So if you wanted to get a newspaper, it had to have the stamp on it, and that stamp money goes back to the British government. The colonists were greatly angered by the Stamp Act. They objected that this was taxation without representation. Underline or highlight taxation without representation. Colonists held marches and rallies against the Stamp Act. Colonial assemblies sent petitions, which are formal requests, to Parliament to change the law. Colonists boycotted, which means refused to buy, underline or highlight that, British goods. Protesters held a special Stamp Act Congress in New York City. Some angry colonists even captured government tax collectors and poured hot tar and placed feathers on them. The British government was taken by surprise by the number of protests against the Stamp Act. Parliament acted quickly to repeal or cancel, underline or highlight that, the law. So, everyone in America got upset about this new tax, this new Stamp Act, so they started protesting. Started having protests and rallies, boycotting, which means refusing to buy British goods. They were even capturing the people who collect the taxes, the tax collectors, and dumping tar all over them and throwing feathers on them and making them run through the town to humiliate them. So the British were like, wow, I can't believe this is happening. But they canceled that Stamp Act just to, kind of calm the people down. But the British government still needed to collect money from the colonists. Parliament, therefore, passed a series of new taxes known as the Townshend duties. Underline or highlight that. These placed a new tax on paper, paint, glass, lead, and tea. I want you to circle that sentence. These common goods were shipped to the colonies from Britain. Once again, Parliament passed these duties without the consent of the colonist. Members of Parliament still felt that the colonists were just too far away to consult with them. Could the colonists have had their own representatives in Parliament? At a time when crossing the Atlantic was slow, any colonial representatives in London would soon have been out of touch with the colonists they represented. Colonial leaders did not want to be represented in Parliament. Instead, they wanted to make their own laws, including those on taxation, in their own colonial assemblies. So, they didn't have anyone in the Parliament, which Parliament is the lawmaking branch in Great Britain. There were no Americans there to represent the American people. The problem was that if they did send an American all the way over there, by the time they got there and were working in Britain, they'd have no way of continuing to talk to the other Americans to see what they wanted, so they couldn't even represent them anyways. Turn the page.
Rocking and a rolling, smishing and a splashing over the horizon. What can it be? The pilgrims sailed the sea to find a place to call their own. In their ship Mayflower, they hoped to find a better home. They finally knocked on Plymouth Rock, and someone said, "We're there." It may not look like home, but at this point I don't care. Oh, they were missing Mother England. They swore their loyalty until the very end. Anything you say, King, it's okay, King. You know it's kind of scary on your own. Gonna build a new land the way we planned. Could you help us run it till it's grown? They planted corn, you know. They built their houses one by one. And bit by bit they worked until the colonies were done. They looked around, yeah, up and down, and someone said, "Hooray! If the king could only see us now, he would be proud of us today." They knew that now they'd run their own land. But George III still vowed he'd rule them to the end. Anything I say, do it my way now. Anything I say, do it my way. Don't you get to feeling independent, 'cause I'm gonna force you to obey. He taxed their property, he didn't give them any choice. And back in England, he didn't give them any voice. That's called taxation without representation, and it's not fair. But when the colonies complained, the king said, "I don't care." He even has the nerve to tax our cup of tea. To put it kindly, King, we really don't agree. Gonna show you how we feel. We're gonna dump this tea and turn this harbor into the biggest cup of tea in history. They wanted no more Mother England. They knew the time had come for them to take command. It's very clear you're being unfair, King. No matter what you say, we won't obey. Gonna hold a revolution now, King, and we're gonna run it all away with no more king.
We're gonna elect a president.
No more king.
He's gonna do what the people want.
No more king.
We're gonna run things our way.
No more king.
Nobody's gonna tell us what to do.
Rocking and a rolling, swishing and a splashing over the horizon. What can it be? Looks like it's going to be
A free country.
Page 22. The colonists formed special committees to protest against the Townshend duties. To prevent unrest, the British government sent more troops to North America. More than 4,000 soldiers were sent to Boston alone. The government quartered these troops in the colonist homes. To quarter means to send soldiers to live in a private citizen's homes. The homeowner was expected to provide food and lodging to each soldier free of charge. I want you to underline or highlight everything from the government quartered these troops in colonist homes down to where it says free of charge. So what that means is, so to make the citizens in America calm down and to kind of control their people, the British sent over a bunch more of their troops. But what they would do, instead of sending them to live on military bases and building more bases, was they would send them to a town, and then those troops would just show up at your house, knock on the door, and say, hey, I'm staying here, you're going to quarter me, which means I'm going to be fed and taken care of and stay in your house until I'm ready to leave. That made the Americans pretty upset. Parliament finally repealed the hated townshed duties. However, it passed a new tax on tea in their place. A British ship carrying tea arrived in Boston Harbor in 1773. A group of colonists dressed as American Indians boarded the ship at night and threw its chests of tea into the harbor in protest. This event became known as the Boston Tea Party. I want you to circle that entire paragraph and put a little star next to it. So the Boston Tea Party was not like a tea party where you sit down and drink tea, but the Boston Tea Party was a bunch of American colonists that were mad at the British for adding new taxes on tea, went on to some of the British boats, grabbed all the tea they just brought over from Great Britain, and threw it into the harbor, which is into the water. The British government was greatly outraged at this destruction of property. Parliament passed the Intolerable Acts. Boston Harbor was closed. The Massachusetts legislature was suspended. The British government assumed the power to appoint all officials in Massachusetts until the tea was paid for. Royal officials would no longer be tried for crimes in the colonies, but in Great Britain. So Great Britain got upset. They got angry. You just took all of our tea and you threw it in the water, and we were planning on making money off that tea. So in response, they passed some new laws, some intolerable acts. They got rid of the government in Boston, Massachusetts, and put in their own people to start running things. Anyone that was with the other government that was charged of a crime would be stuck on a boat and sent back to Great Britain to go to court. And that was just their way of reacting to what the Americans were doing, protesting their taxes. The outbreak of the Revolution. 12 of the 13 colonies sent representatives to Philadelphia to meet as a Continental Congress in September of 1774. Underline or highlight that first sentence. The Congress assembled, sent protests to Britain, and agreed on a colonial boycott of British goods. Its members decided that another Continental Congress should be held in May of 1775. Then they went home. Meanwhile, American patriots organized in Boston. They collected guns and ammunition. The governor of Massachusetts sent soldiers to seize colonial leaders in arms just outside of Boston. British troops and armed colonists fired on one another at Lexington and Concord in April 1775. The American Revolution had begun. The Second Continental Congress was about to meet. Many of the delegates to the Second Continental Congress were already on their way to Philadelphia. The Second Continental Congress began its meeting on May 10, 1775. Most of the delegates from other colonies strongly supported the decision of Massachusetts to resist the British. They encouraged the other colonies to join the struggle. The Continental Congress formed its own army, known as the Continental Army. Next, it chose George Washington, a Virginian, to command it. Washington was an experienced commander from the French and Indian War. So George Washington was already a commander, but he used to be in the British or the English army. So he was with the group that they were now fighting. So he used to be a British soldier. He was a commander. He led men. He fought against the French to help the British win. But now he realizes that he wants to stand up for America. So he joins the Continental Army, which was America's first army that defeated the British. So now that you finished page 22, I want you to go to the handout that you have.
As your body grows bigger,
Your mind must flower.
it's great to learn.
'Cause knowledge is power.
It's Schoolhouse Rocky, the chip off the block of your favorite Schoolhouse Rock.
How would you like to hear the shot heard round the world?
The British are coming! The British are coming!
Now the ride of Paul Revere set the nation on its ear, and the shot at Lexington heard round the world. When the British fired in the early dawn, the War of Independence had begun. The die was cast, the rebel flag unfurled, and on to Concord marched the foe to seize the arsenal there, you know. waking folks and searching all around. Till our militia stopped them in their tracks. At the old North Bridge we turned them back and chased those redcoats back to Boston town. And the shot heard round the world was the start of the revolution. The Minutemen were ready on the move. Take your powder, take your gun, report to General Washington. Hurry men, there's not an hour to lose. Now at famous Bunker Hill, even though we lost, it was quite a thrill. The rebel Colonel Prescott proved he was wise. Outnumbered and low on ammunition as the British stormed his position, he said, hold your fire till you see the whites of their eyes. Though the next few years were rough, General Washington's men proved they were tough. Those hungry, ragged boys would not be beat. One night they crossed the Delaware, surprised the Hessians in their lair, and at Valley Forge they just bundled up their feet. Now the shot heard round the world was the start of the revolution. The Minutemen were ready on the move. Take your blanket, take your sun, report to General Washington. We've got our rights and now it's time to prove. Well, they showed such determination that they won the admiration of countries across the sea like France and Spain, who loaned the colony ships and guns and put the British on the run and the Continental Army on its feet again. And though they lost some battles too, the Americans swore they'd see it through. Their raiding parties kept up hit and run. At Yorktown, the British could not retreat, bottled up by Washington and the French fleet. Cornwallis surrendered, and finally we had won. Hooray! From the shot heard round the world to the end of the revolution, the Continental rabble took the day, and the father of our country beat the British there at Yorktown and brought freedom to you and me and the USA. God bless America. Let freedom ring.
After you finish reading and marking the text, you have this handout. I want you to complete numbers 1 through 5 on page 38, where it says the word, definition, and then question. Cross out where it says question, and then just use that whole space across, both of those boxes across, to write a good definition for those terms. You are doing numbers 1 through 5 today. On the back side of the handout, you need to answer questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So 1 through 7. You need to identify or describe the person, place, or thing, and then you need to write why it was important or significant to the American Revolution. Once you've done that, you've completed today's lesson.